Hello everybody, you're listening to the Earful Tower podcast. My name's Oliver G. This is a show all about Paris, all about France, where typically I interview a guest who gives us some kind of inside information to Paris, France, being French, all that kind of stuff. That's what I usually do, except I'm on holiday. So today you're going to hear me interview podcaster Oliver G. talking about a story that I wrote a little while ago that I think you guys will still find useful. Maybe even entertaining, maybe even informative. But first, this show is brought to you by French Today audiobooks. And if you visit their site via frenchtoday.com/earful7, you'll get a further 10% off all their audiobooks, which, if you follow any of my social media accounts, you'll have noticed that they had a massive flash sale for Bastille Day. They took 35% off everything yesterday, which means if you use my code, you got 45% off everything, aka half price, and I know that a lot of you listeners jumped on that chance, so well done. That's what you get for following the Earful Tower on Instagram and Facebook. Facebook, by the way, feels a bit dead at the moment, doesn't it? You put a picture up on Facebook, you put a link to a podcast episode of your own, no one seems to respond, but on Instagram everyone goes crazy. I don't know what that's about, but if you're not on the Instagram train, jump on it, because that's where the community seems to be. So at the Earful Tower on Instagram. But today's episode was inspired because I was reading, I've got it in front of me actually, I was reading an article that was sort of doing the rounds on the internet in the last couple of days. And what I'm looking at now is from The Independent, and it says, "Why like a local is the most overrated concept in travel." And the gist of this article is pretty much the average local person doesn't go to the most interesting bars. They have their own regular haunts, like they do the laundry rather than going to the newest speakeasy, and so on and so on. And it made me think of an article that I wrote on my own site, theearfultower.com, in 2017, which I wrote, "First time in Paris? Here are 12 tips from a local." And I think, well, I kind of disagree with the article. Traveling like a local is important, and I want to point out a few things that I wrote that are really sort of important if you are wanting to blend in France. And it's not just going to, secret bars and, all that kind of stuff. It's more about things that people in Paris do and that you should do if you want to make the most of it. So you can check it out. It'll be on theearfultower.com, this very article. But I'm going to sort of talk you through it a little bit and, give you guys a bit of news and some exciting developments on the horizon for the Earful Tower. So, let's get into it. Okay, now before we even get started, I said the episode was brought to you by French Today, and that is true, but I also want to do something. I want to send a few shout-outs, 3 shout-outs, in fact, to 3 new Patreon supporters of the Earful Tower from this very week, all of them with names that I don't think I can pronounce, but I'm going to give it a little bit of a go. So hello and welcome behind the scenes to Joanne Bamberger, Tammy Wanamaker, and Johannes Krabben. They all sound kind of Swedish. Johan Bamberger, Tammy Wanamaker, and Johannes Krabben. And maybe that's just because I'm in Sweden. But welcome behind the scenes. And I want to just start on Patreon for a second because it's because of the Patreon supporters the show exists. Like I always say, I would have given up a long time ago. And I've been looking for a way to send a very big thank you. And I've found it. So here you go. Besides all the extra content and everything, I've been working furiously behind the scenes to organize one event to end all events, and that is gonna take place on October 22nd. The Australian ambassador and his team have agreed to let me do a big event at the ambassador's residence. Now, if you've been following the Earful Tower, or especially on Instagram where I've posted a few pictures, the Australian ambassador's residence is that beautiful big building that's in the 15th arrondissement. It's just a stone's throw from the Eiffel Tower, and it's got the most beautiful balcony in the whole country, I'd say. And it's there that you might have seen that picture of me and Lena that somebody took, and I posted a while back, where we're just standing looking at our phones on the balcony. Someone took a picture of us when we weren't looking. Beautiful background, the perfect place for an event, if you ask me. And so the deal is that they said I can bring 70 guests with me. And what I'm going to do is the first spots are going to go to the Patreon members. So I'm going to put out the invite later on this afternoon. Come to Paris if you don't already live here for October 22nd. The idea is I'm going to do an event. It's going to be like a 2-hour event. There's going to be a mingle where you get to meet people. I assume you'll get to meet the ambassador. We'll all be hanging out, drinking champagne up on the balcony, but there'll also be a 30-minute kind of live podcast episode. And the idea, because it's the Australian Embassy, is that it's about how Australians are, moving and shaking around in Paris, kind of influencing things here, opening restaurants. I'm not going to give away too much yet, but there's going to be a lot of quick interviews and then, a chance to meet a bunch of people. So even if you're not a Patreon supporter, I might live stream the event if you're abroad, but if you are a Patreon supporter and you are in Paris, you get first invites. So go and sign up, and welcome again to Joanne, Tammy, and Johannes, or Johannes, however you would like to be called. So that's that. I want to talk to you a little bit about being a local in Paris. So there's this idea, as I said, that no one wants to travel like a local anymore, or the whole concept is dead. Forget all that. Here are my tips for what you should do to make the most of your time in Paris. And I've listed them out, and I'm just going to sort of talk you through it. And these are tried and tested because I've had feedback on a couple of them lately, especially this the number 2 here. But we'll start with number 1. When you're in Paris, you got to look up. Now, what does that mean, look up? It means too many people are going around without exploring enough, as far as I'm concerned. And there's so many cool things above the first and second floor. For example, one of my favorite little stumble-upons was there's this thing called the Angel of Turbigo. I don't even know if that's what it's called. That's what I call it. In the 3rd arrondissement, really near to where I used to live. And I used to walk this one street all the time to get to work. And then I was sort of Googling around, and I think it said on Google, the Secret Angel. I was like, what is this Secret Angel? I went back to this street, Rue Turbigo, or Turbigo, I guess maybe the French people pronounce it. And on this corner, if you look up, there's this enormous big sort of stone statue that stretches up to the very top floor. And it's kind of hidden behind all the trees, and it's just looking out over this sort of intersection, and it's really beautiful. And I've taken pictures of it. I've been back a couple times. Even fairly recently, I snuck into the building, which I don't advise you guys to do because I wanted to get to the top floor and see what I could see from up there. But that's a perfect example of the treasures that are out of your typical line of sight. So look up, but also look down. Now, there's 2 reasons to look down. One is because a lot of people say that Paris is covered in dog mess, shall we say, and that can be true. It really can be true, especially on the street that I live on, where there's a really old guy who never cleans up after his dog. But it's also because there are interesting things at street level. And my favorite example, if you are watching the extra videos I do for Patreon supporters, I almost always point out the chasse-rue, the stone guards, the beautiful, intricate, sometimes ornate, sometimes quite boring, but always interesting stone and iron things that they put on the insides of the doors to prevent wagon wheels from knocking down the doors. Now, when I go around Paris, I typically stop, much to the dismay of my wife, I typically stop and take pictures when I find interesting ones. And whenever I have tourists visiting or friends visiting, I tend to point it out to them. It's become almost a speech for me because I'm so obsessed with them. And I recently met with 2 Swedes. I'm in Sweden right now. 2 Swedes who I met for the first time in Paris about a month ago. And I told them about these stone guards. Some of them are shaped like dragons, or some of them are just, they can be really interesting. And I said, look, I apologize, but now that I've told you about this, you might find yourself obsessed like I am. And when I met them last week in Sweden, they said, you ruined the holiday. All we did was go around looking for these stone guards, and we didn't notice anything else in Paris. I think they were joking that I ruined their holiday, but it's a good lesson. Keep your eyes down as well, scanning around for interesting things in the city, because there's a lot more to Paris than meets the eye. Now, another thing I've put in this article that I've talked about so many times on the show that I think you all know already, but I have to stress it, say bonjour to everyone. Just, you should know the drill already. It's basically considered quite rude if you don't say bonjour. And even if you got the most atrocious French accent in the world, even if you walk in and say bonjour or bonjour, it doesn't matter. Just do it, and things will go off more smoothly than if you walk in and say, even if you go in really politely and say, hello, do you speak English? Even preface that with a bonjour will make a big difference. Now, I'm going to get through a couple more, and then I'm going to take a break and change the subject for a second. But number 4, I've written avoid the metro if you can, especially if you're coming during the summer. riding on the metro can be a number of negative experiences. It can be daunting because it can be quite confusing. It can be hot and smelly. It can sometimes it works pretty well, but sometimes it can get stuck. And if you're there in the summer and it's really hot, it's going to ruin your afternoon. But the main reason to avoid it is because it's actually frightfully easy to get around in Paris without going underground. Everything is fairly close. If you're staying fairly central, you'll be able to walk to almost anything. And even the things that you can't walk to, like say if you're staying really central and you want to go to the Earful Tower, yeah, it might be an hour to get out there, but it's a really nice walk. Paris is built for walking. Don't rely on the metro. And you know what I add to that? Recently I came back from abroad and I flew into Charles de Gaulle airport, and I took the train back. So to take the train back into the city, you have to go down, and I gotta say, it was a terrible introduction to Paris because it was quite dirty. The lights weren't working. I was there at night, and it almost felt a little bit unsafe. And I hate to say this because I do love Paris, but I was thinking about tourists who might be coming, getting their first impression of the city. And I was thinking, carrying all your luggage would be a horrible way to start your adventure in Paris. And as I was sitting on the train, just to sort of complete this horrible picture, they said in 6 different languages, beware of pickpockets. 6 different languages. And I was like, this is such a bad first impression. So what I would advise you guys, if you can afford it, I mean, it's almost worth adding the extra budget for yourself. Take a taxi or an Uber. Someone emailed me recently saying, is Uber illegal in Paris? It's absolutely not illegal. You can take it. It works very well. I take Uber. And it might be about 40 or 50 euros to get to your apartment from the train station. But look, I'd recommend it. I took the train, and I usually do. But in terms of first impression, get to your hotel or your Airbnb and start from there rather than have to take the metro. Anyway, if you do take the metro, it can be quite interesting. Go on my site, check out, I wrote an article, 30 things even the Parisians don't know about the Paris metro. There's a little bit of extra reading for you. Check that one out. Now, 2 more before a little break. Number 5, eat your baguette on the go. Now, what do I mean by that? I mean, Parisians never eat when they're walking. And that's something I noticed pretty quick. When I moved to Paris, I worked in an office with a lot of French people, and I used to eat my lunch at the desk sometimes, which is one of the biggest faux pas that you can do in Paris. They all hate that. You shouldn't do that. Eating is like a respected and almost sacred thing, and no one except foreigners and tourists eat on the go, which I think you'll notice immediately. Even if you go to McDonald's and grab a cheeseburger, you eat it in McDonald's or you take it wherever you're going. You don't eat it on the street in Paris. Anyway, but there's one exception, and that is a baguette. When you buy a baguette from the bakery, especially if it's warm and delicious, it's quite acceptable to take a bite out of the top as you go. In fact, it's perfectly acceptable. And if you don't have to bite it off, you can rip it off with your hand and eat it on the way. That's the one exception. So you can eat your baguette on the go and do it. You'll feel very French, I think. Number 6 is experiment with, instead of getting a baguette, get a tradition. It's much more tasty. It looks slightly different, but it's, as far as I'm concerned, about 10 times more tasty. And it's what all the French people do. So go in there, you'll see it. When I say it looks slightly different, rather than being a long straight stick, it kind of almost looks more like an oval. I don't know, you have to research it yourself, but try it. You can thank me later. Experiment with a tradition. And considering this episode is brought to you by French Today, I think I can play one of my old YouTube videos. But it's Camille with a lot more hair on her head than in the picture I put up on Instagram yesterday. It's me and her when I went and visited her up in Brittany, and we went through a drive-in bakery, and she showed me exactly how to order a tradition. I call it a tradition. So listen to this.
No. We have to drive to the car.
In the car.
Bonjour madame. Vous êtes prêts?
Oui.
Une baguette tradition, s'il vous plaît. Et voilà. Merci beaucoup madame. Au revoir, bonne journée.
That easy?
That easy.
There you go. Just a reminder, guys, you should be following on YouTube for all that kind of crazy fun. Me and Camille in a car in the French countryside ordering traditions. Anyway, before I get on to the rest of this list, I thought I'd do something I love to do here, is read out an email from a reader. And the one that I've got here, I received this very morning. So you can't get... It's like a fresh baguette of an email right here. And it's from Cindy Owens. Now, it's much too long to read out the whole thing because it's got 5 paragraphs and they're numbered. But I like what she wrote here. She said, I listened to your latest podcast and I'm trying for the trifecta. Now, what she means here is she literally wrote it out. First, praise. She put a bit of praise. Loves the show. Happy to be able to listen twice a week. She says, my timing is so good. I always make her laugh or smile. Lena comes up with such good comebacks and interesting words for a generally non-English speaker. She has such wit. I enjoy when she's on the show. It goes on. I'm not going to just keep reading it, but it's very lovely of you to share those kind words about Lena. And as a general rule, when one of your emails mentions Lena, guys, I always read it out to her. Now, number 2, going for the trifecta, where I listen. My favorite thing when I get an email from listeners is where they tell me where they listen. Last week, I think we had someone in Brisbane listening while walking their dog with a rainbow lorikeets in the background. I love that one. But Cindy, she listens to the show as she's prepping in the kitchen and staring out the window. Now, Cindy, you didn't put where, so I'm imagining America, but I got no idea. It's the perfect thing to listen to while chopping onions. While chopping onions. That might be my favorite sentence that I've ever read about my show in the history of the Earful Tower. The Earful Tower is the perfect thing to listen to while chopping onions. I love it. And she adds that she's also gone to sleep listening to the podcast, which isn't, well, that's not so good. That means it makes you go to sleep and it makes you cry? Nay. Okay, third question, and that's the trifecta. I love it when people put a question in their emails because it gives me something to answer. And she says, what are your favorite foods? She says, what are you and Lena's favorite foods? She says she loves to cook and eat, especially French food. That explains the onions. Maybe that's a French onion soup. But I like to hear what other people love to eat. And it goes on with more questions about food, but I'll answer that. What's my favorite kind of food? I tell you what, lately I've become a huge fan of French cheese. So people who've been listening to this show for a long while will know that in the early days of my time in Paris, I went into a cheese shop and I was so frightened by the whole experience that I swore off going into cheese shops. And it was like I've said post-traumatic stress disorder before, and I say that lightly because I know that is actually a very serious thing, but it was that for me. I didn't want to go into cheese shops for a while because I found the whole experience very uncomfortable, and I didn't like the way that I didn't know what I was ordering. I didn't know how much to order. I didn't know how much it should cost. And then fairly recently I got much better at it, and I've become something of a local in my nearby fromagerie. So I love cheese and I love experimenting with the different types, and I said very recently to Lena that I think I could go the rest of my life only eating cheese, although it doesn't sound very healthy. What's Lena's favorite food? I have no idea. I'll ask her. She's about 3 rooms down. I'll yell out to her to come and answer. I'll do it right now. Hang on. Lena, can you come here for a second? It's crucially important. Okay. She thinks it's crucially important, so that's a good sign. I'm down here. I'm live. There's a question for you from a listener.
What do you mean live?
Well, I'm recording.
Oh.
So, hey Lena.
Hi.
If you can come next to me for a second.
Yeah.
So the question is, it's asked about me and you, but I'll just ask you now. If you can come right down next to me.
Right here.
This is from Cindy Owens, who listens. It's one of my favorite sentences ever. It says, the Earful Tower is the perfect thing to listen to while chopping onions.
What does that mean?
Well, she likes to cook. Anyway, the
Or
question...
is it like a reason to cry?
Yeah, made that joke already. What are your and Lena's favorite foods? It goes on, but let's go with that.
Favorite food?
Yeah.
Like, right now?
No, ever.
Oh, no, that's too big. I'm just gonna go with right now.
Okay, extra points if it's got some kind of French angle, I suppose.
Oh, I really like, well, at the moment I really like to just, it's very warm, so something simple and light. I like to have a burrata and make a salad out of watermelon, little cocktail tomatoes, and basil and mint.
Is that French? Would we go French with that one?
How about
No, we can go.
the burrata?
It's funny that you say a cheese-based
know.
meal because I said cheese was my favorite as well.
Yeah.
Anyway,
Oh, yeah.
that was all I needed.
Okay. Alright.
Thanks
Well,
for,
that's a good one.
Thanks for being the occasional co-host as well. but I won't foist it on you today.
Bye.
Au revoir. Love you.
Love you.
Oh, what a girl. Okay, and there's a bit more from Cindy, but I'm not going to go into it right now. But I will say she's also a Patreon supporter, and that is a bonus point right there. Now, oh no, there is actually one more thing. 5th paragraph. When I saw your post about the July book club and everyone picking their own book, I thought to myself, then Oliver can't pick any of these books for future months, can he? But guess what? I can. It just might mean that one person has to reread something, but I think it's really good, that book club, getting people to recommend books, because if I just pick the book, I'm not a dictator. I'm not just going to pick the book every month. I'm going to make it interactive. And if you guys at home don't know what I'm talking about, the Earful Tower book club is all about, reading a book about France every month and talking about it. Although I will say a lot of people in that group are very passively silent, and it's more fun if you talk. So back to the list. Point 7 I've got here. Grab a coffee at a typical cafe terrace. You guys probably know that I talk about cafes and coffee a lot. That's something I do all the time on the Earful Tower. I love to have a coffee. In terms of value for money, I don't go out for expensive dinners. Can't really afford it, but I think a coffee at a nice coffee shop is a really good way. You know, for €4 or €5, you sit on a terrace, people watch. It's one of the most fantastic ways to have an experience, a cheap experience in Paris. So what I've written here is go to a typical cafe terrace, base it on the terrace, forget about the menu, forget about the food, go and get an espresso, sit on the terrace and watch the people go by. The coffee might be disgusting, might be overpriced, but for €2 or €3 it's absolutely worth it. But at point 8, I've written grab a coffee at a good place. So for example, go to the specialty coffee shops where you're going to get extremely good service, extremely good coffee, and who knows, you might see me at one of them, especially if you keep an eye on that. I did a blog post that was the top coffee shop in every arrondissement, and some places like Khartoum, KB coffee shop, the Peloton, I'm there all the time. Come and say hello if you see me. You won't be the first. I love it. Now, number 9, go for an aimless walk. What have I written here? Go for an aimless walk. Do not fill every second of your itinerary with things to do. That's one thing I hear a lot of people telling me. They email me and they say, I'm going to be in Paris for 6 days. I've got every morning, every afternoon figured out where I'm going to be, what I'm going to do, what I've booked. And I think, no, that's the wrong way to do it. Sure, you can book a few things here and there, but one of the magic parts of Paris is walking around being a flaneur, as in having absolutely no plan, aimless walking, seeing what you find, looking up, looking down, and exploring, really. It's the best thing to do. I do it all the time, and I 100% recommend it. Now, we're getting through the list pretty quickly here. We got only 3 to go, but number 10, I've written visit the trendy 10th and 11th arrondissements. And that's another thing a lot of people, I think, make mistakes, is they go to Montmartre and Marais, which are both absolutely wonderful districts. They go to the Eiffel Tower, they go to the Louvre, and then they leave without seeing how everybody really lives. I mean, I feel like I explained that not very well. They don't see where daily life is happening. You know, if you walk around in Montmartre, especially some of the streets, and I love Montmartre, but some of the streets are geared towards tourism. Like the menus are all in English. There's people selling Paris shirts, things like that. If you go to places like the 10th and 11th arrondissements, there's a really sort of vibrant scene. You won't find places to photograph as much as you might in the Marais, but you'll find daily life as the Parisians are living it, and I think you'll enjoy it. And in a recent episode with Sam Davies, the guy who was becoming French, he was pointing out a lot of good places to see around the Canal Saint-Martin area, and he's got his finger firmly on the pulse of the good things to do, so go and check that out. Number 11, I said it, don't be afraid to go through doors. If a door is open in Paris, go through it. If you get in trouble, say that you're a tourist, you'll be fine, and I truly believe this is true. Especially these big courtyards that are kind of semi-public anyway, they need to be seen. So if you've watched my walk shows, the videos where they're like talk shows but walking, I often, when there's a door open, I often pop in there. And on the link to this article that I did, you'll see when I was with the real estate agent and property consultant Adrian Leeds, we walked through one of these big old amazing doors, and we got in trouble and got kicked out. So it happens to all of us, but it's always worth it, as long as you're not trying to get into whatever the French equivalent of the CIA headquarters are. Often you'll find, like I remember I was in the Marais once, and there's this beautiful door. In fact, under point 2 on the website, look down, and there's a picture of a blue door with a a blue horse wagon wheel protector. That very door down, I think it's Rue du Temple, was open one day, and there was an elderly woman was walking out, and I sort of poked my head in, and she said, "Oh, you interested in this place? Come in, come and have a look." And she let me in, and she showed me around this magnificent courtyard, and then she could sort of see how interested I was, and she said, "You should see the cellar." She said the cellar's as old as you can imagine, which is kind of weird that an elderly lady would take a young man down to the cellar. One of us was statistically quite likely to kill the other one of us, if you ask me. But we both went down there, and she showed me around, and it was amazing. So there are opportunities to see things that are off the typical tour guide list, and they include going through doors. Now, point 12, the final point on my list, is listen to the Earful Tower podcast, which you're already doing, so you know exactly what you're doing. But I've continued with it to say that you should buy the guide. I wrote a guide to Paris. It's just a PDF, but it sort of takes a lot of the tips that have been on the episode from different guests and experts, restaurant, tour guides, and the cocktail queen, Forrest Collins, her tips, all that stuff I put into this mammoth PDF guide, and that was a year ago. And what I've been working on behind the scenes is updating that with all the new tips. And I'm almost finished with that. That's something that's going to go out free to all the Patreon members, but I'm also going to sell it for, what I sell it for, €19.99, which is essentially 20 euros. But that will be at the bottom of the article. Check it out. That new version of the PDF will be out really soon. If you're following online, you're not going to miss it because I'll be shouting it from the rooftops. But that's my top 12 tips to enjoy Paris like a local. I hope you've enjoyed them. It was a bit of a sort of summer episode, this one, saying I'm out of the city, but I'm going to be back there in a few days, rock and rolling and getting back into it. Don't forget that big event coming up October 22nd at the Australian Ambassador's Residence. You won't be able to just walk in, you'll need an invite, and the way to get an invite, there's two ways: become a Patreon supporter or wait for me to invite you. And I'm looking forward to seeing you there. And I'm just going to finish up with a little quick word from French Today, the sponsor of this episode. Now, if you're new around here and you've never listened to an episode of the Earful Tower before, I hope you enjoyed your first one there. But what I've been doing is, for this entire year, is I've partnered up with French Today, which is a audiobook. It's a language learning company. They've got this whole method to teach you French. It's beyond just hello, goodbye, here's the past tense, here's the future tense. It's a whole method, it's a whole story, and the idea is that you listen along, repeat along, and eventually speak French very, very well, which is what I'm doing and I'm working on. And at the end of these Monday episodes, I talk a little bit about either my progress or sort of what they're doing. And what I figured I'd do is, seeming I was doing a really basic episode about going to Paris as a tourist and sort of understanding the city a little bit, I figured I'd continue. Remember that one of the early points I said was that you should always say bonjour? Well, another thing that's crucially important is to say thank you or you're welcome. And I figured I'd go right back to the beginning of French Today in À moi Paris level 1. So we're talking real basics. And this will give you a bit of an idea what you can expect if you want to do the same thing. This is her tips on how to say and pronounce them. So to say thank you, you say merci. And Camille has written here, please be careful when you use this word. It's very commonly used and very butchered. It is not the English mercy, as in like a mercy ship. The middle sound is closer to the one in the word mer. And the second one is like sea, as in, the ocean. A long French E sound. So merci, merci, not mercy. Do not go up to people and say mercy, mercy, mercy. You won't get very far. So merci, repeat after me. I'll do Camille's job for a second. Merci. Oh, very nice, very good. And then to answer, maybe someone says merci to you. You answer, you are welcome. There's two ways to do it. There's the and I'm reading now. You have the informal version tu, and the formal version vous, and you need to know them both with the appropriate spoken glidings. So the more formal one that you'd say to someone essentially who's older than you or who's in a stranger perhaps, just if you want to be polite, you say je vous en prie, je vous en prie, je vous en prie, right? And then to say it to maybe someone younger than you or someone you're friends with, you say je t'en prie, je t'en prie, je t'en prie. There you go. And there's a note here. A gliding is what happens in modern French when we glide over some letters, kind of like gotta go, instead of saying I have got to go in American English. It's very common nowadays in French and reinforces the difference between spoken and written French. It's what's happening when je t'en prie is pronounced je t'en prie. The E of the je is glided, je t'en prie. Same for the word mademoiselle. You don't say mademoiselle, it's pronounced mademoiselle. So there you go, there's a little bit of a tip from French Today. That's the kind of thing you can expect if you buy their audiobooks. As we speak, they're having a 20% sale off for the whole next month. If you go to their site, frenchtoday.com/earful7, guess what? That becomes 30% off. You can thank me later, and if you do thank me, do it in an email. And remember those little tips that Cindy Owens remembered. Chuck in a question. Tell me where you listen. Are you cutting onions? What are you doing? I love to hear. And otherwise, like I said, follow on Instagram. There's a lot going on there, and I think that's kind of, I think that's where we're going. Instagram. Go and check it out. As for me, I'll be back in Paris in a few days, and I'll be back with an episode on Thursday. Au revoir.